My sister blasted my darkest secret on TikTok, shredding my life to pieces with every like, every comment. A global audience dissecting my trauma for entertainment. The moment I walked into the living room, everything felt wrong. My sister, glued to her phone, had that familiar smirk, eyes bright with some hidden thrill. "Just giving some advice," she said casually. But there was a glint of something else, something unsettling. Then, a series of notifications buzzed relentlessly on my phone, each vibration like a taunt. When I finally looked, her face filled my screen, recounting my story, tearing open my most private vulnerabilities for all to see. A surge of anger and betrayal twisted within me, each like or comment like a jab to the gut. Why would she do this to me? Expose my pain for her own fleeting validation? I felt that primal, wrenching need for answers, for confrontation. Somewhere deep inside, an unresolved question echoed. Could this shattered trust ever be pieced back together? Standing in her doorway, I felt the weight of the accusation thicken the air between us. Her room, once a haven of endless giggles and late-night secrets, now seemed to brace itself against the coming storm. Everything looked unnervingly familiar and yet so alien. The posters she adored, the softness of her bed, the scent of her favorite lavender candles. But my eyes were on her and her alone, lounging against the headboard, seemingly engrossed in a book as if my heart wasn't about to crack open right before her. "How could you, of all people, expose me like this?" I demanded, my voice breaking, barely recognizing the sound of it. Her gaze lifted slowly, meeting mine, and it was like a shockwave radiating through me. Confusion flickered across her face, then quickly masked by that infuriating calm she'd always wielded like a shield. She said nothing, letting the silence grow louder, letting it gnaw at whatever restraint I had left. "Was I nothing more than your newest trending topic?" The words escaped my lips, raw and jagged, each one laced with a bitterness I could hardly stomach. I wanted her to feel the sting, a desperate hope that pain could bridge the ever-widening gap between us. My sister sat up, the book forgotten beside her. "You don't understand," she started, her voice low, smoothing over jagged edges. But I wasn't ready for explanations or excuses that easily unraveled when faced with the tight coil of betrayal. I refused the comforting pull of nostalgia. This was war. "Explain it to me then." I heard my voice echo back from the walls, louder, harsher than before, my fists clenched at my sides, nails digging into flesh to keep from falling apart. Inside, fear wrestled with anger, a tangled mess pushing my heart into my throat with every labored breath. She closed her eyes briefly, a small, brittle smile on her lips. "It wasn't supposed to be like this. I never meant." Her voice trailed off, leaving the bitterness of unfinished sentences hanging between us like a broken promise. But intent was irrelevant here. The mess spread like ink in water, bleeding through everything, and there wasn't enough air to breathe, let alone understand. Desperation clawed up my chest, turning my skin to tight, tremulous heat. "Do you have any idea what you've done? To me? To us?" Her gaze sharpened, something resigned and sad flashing behind her eyes. "I thought it would help," she confessed, almost a whisper. "Ignorant, maybe, but not uncaring." Yet that offered no solace, and I was too far gone, grasping at unraveling threads, futile against the tide of betrayal. I stepped back, the room blurring as tears fought their way to my lashes. She reached out, a silent plea resting heavily in the air between us. But it hung unanswered as I turned away, her room, our shared past, left rent, inseparable from its own specters. I stumbled back into the sanctuary of my room, but the four walls felt like a cell closing in on me. The echo of our confrontation still reverberated through the house, the angry words bouncing around in my head like ricocheting bullets. My heart pounded with the rhythm of a captive animal, desperate for escape, desperate for refuge. I sank onto the bed, the sheets crumpling beneath my weight as if mirroring the collapse inside me. My room, once a haven, now felt foreign, haunted by the betrayal that hung in the air. The irony was bitter, my stronghold reduced to a stage for turmoil. My heart felt like it was cracking open. I didn't think it was possible to feel this raw. My phone lay next to me, the screen lighting up with each notification. Each chime was a reminder of violated trust. A reminder that the secret I held so close was now dissected and exposed. My finger hovered over it, torn between wanting to face the chaos and the suffocating urge to hide. With a sharp breath I wasn't aware of holding, I tossed the phone across the room. Its incessant buzzing was a persistent reminder that privacy, much like trust, was now just another casualty of her deceit. I closed my eyes, trying to shut out the reality pounding against my skull. The dim light seeped through the curtains, painting the room in muted hues of gray. I wanted to be a part of that softness, let it seep into my skin and drown out the noise, drown out her voice declaring my secrets to the world. But the light couldn't touch the clawing darkness within. She knew. She knew what she was doing when she opened her mouth. Did she revel in the chaos she'd spawned? My fists trembled at the thought, but the anger felt impotent, doused by the cold tide of sadness washing over me. The phone buzzed again, defiant in its persistence. Silence would have been blissful, but these notifications, relentless as ocean waves, threatened to erode what strength I had left. Were they messages of pity, of disbelief, or worse, satisfaction? Each buzz was a punch that landed squarely in the gut, forcing the air out until I felt bruised all over. I drew my knees up, wrapping my arms around them. The pressure was a futile attempt to keep myself from falling to pieces, as if tightly binding the fragments could save what was left. I could hear her laughter in my mind, cruel and dismissive, as if every intimate moment we shared was just ammunition waiting to be unloaded. The violation was complete, and the pain felt immeasurable. Through the blaring white noise of my thoughts, the question broke through, cutting and clear. How do you pick up the pieces when someone you trust points you out to the world, naked and defenseless? My breath shuddered again. There were no answers, only the silent screams in my mind. She stood in the doorway, silhouetted against the pale afternoon light seeping through the curtains. Her presence cast an uneasy shadow over the room, a tremor of tension quivering in the space between us. I could hear the distant hum of traffic outside, a reassurance of normalcy that felt miles away from this confrontation. The muscles in my jaw tightened as our eyes met, the weight of unspoken words pressing down on my chest. She took a cautious step forward, her eyes wide with an attempt at sincerity that faltered under the burden of her betrayal. "I didn't mean to hurt you," she began, her voice a soft, yielding thing that failed to mask the cracks beneath. The room smelled faintly of lavender, remnants of the air freshener she had once liked, now sickly sweet and suffocating. Her apology was weak, a whisper of regret caught in an insincere breeze. It drifted over me, offering no solace, only irritation that prickled along my skin. It was for the greater good, she continued, struggling to hold my gaze, her hands wringing together like she was trying to mold the truth into something palpable. "Maybe someone needed to hear your story, you know?" Each word she spoke was like a needle, puncturing the fragile trust we'd tried to stitch together over years. I could taste the bitterness rising, while at the back of my throat. "When?" I asked, with a carefully controlled calm that belied the storm within. Did my pain become everyone else's parable? I watched her struggle with that, as though she was parsing through the wreckage for something to salvage. Her eyes darted around the room, landing everywhere but on me, searching for a lifeline. "I just thought, maybe it could help someone," she mumbled, the ground beneath her reasoning cracking with each feeble justification. Outside, a car alarm blared, a piercing reminder of the chaotic world we inhabited. Her inability to grasp the gravity of her actions was astounding, a flaw in her logic as glaring as a spotlight. I felt the anger simmering, a low boil beneath the surface that begged for release. Yet, somewhere deep inside, I also felt the old wound, that delicate thread of trust she'd snapped, bleeding silently into the fissures of our fractured relationship. "Helping." The word escaped my lips in a quiet, incredulous scoff. "Or trying to redeem yourself by making me your martyr?" The question hung between us, unanswered, yet echoing with the truth of her misguided intentions. She stood there, her breath shallow, her eyes glassy with a frustration she couldn't seem to articulate, as if any explanation would collapse under the weight of her guilt. She retreated a step, the apology she'd offered as fragile as the hope she'd shattered. The space between us yawned wider, filled now with a silence more damning than any argument. I turned away, feeling the chill of her absence settling in even before she left the room. Our conflict far from resolution, a wound left open and unfinished. The night air wrapped around me like a second skin, cool and slightly damp, whispering against the back of my neck. I closed the front door behind me as quietly as possible, not wanting to disturb the fragile silence inside the house. My feet found the path effortlessly, tread familiar through years of restless escape. The street lamps cast pale pools of light, dappling the cracked sidewalk ahead as I began to wander the neighborhood, trying to tune out the digital echo that screamed inside my head. Each step carried me further from the persistent glow of my phone screen, the relentless notifications that felt more like accusations. Here, under the vast stretch of the sky, I longed to find solace, something tangible to grip, to hold me grounded while I wrestled with the storm brewing inside. The streets were deserted, people cocooned within their homes, safe from the world beyond their curtains. I envied that. My eyes flicked upwards, watching the clouds roll lazily, silver trails bleeding across the dark canvas of night. I watched the clouds roll across the sky and wished my secrets could drift away with them, unnoticed and unbothered. I murmured to no one but the wind. The clouds danced onward, unburdened by human failings. A chill crept under my skin, but I didn't mind. It felt good to be cold, to experience something so simple when everything else felt insurmountably complex. The distant hum of a car engine faded, leaving behind an oppressive quiet that somehow made my thoughts louder. I tried to focus on my breathing, matching it to the rhythmic whisper of leaves in the breeze. But the quiet had its own weight, pressing down, amplifying the crushing numbness that threatened to swallow me whole. Was this what escape looked like? I wondered. Just another illusion, a temporary reprieve from the chaos I couldn't seem to outrun. I found myself wandering to the edge of the park, where shadows pooled and gathered like memories best left untouched. The swing set creaked softly in its own ghostly rhythm, echoing lonely nights spent wishing for a different life. I kicked at the gravel, sending small clusters scattering like the jumbled pieces of my own mess, bits that I couldn't seem to fit back together. There was no magic in this moment, no lightning bolt of clarity to strike down answers. Just me, the quiet of the night, and the truth I couldn't deny, that I was hiding from something that refused to stay hidden. But here, amidst the silent judgment of my own mind, I felt something else simmering beneath the surface, an unease shaking loose, daring to rise. Perhaps this wasn't peace, but the very edge of it, a precipice I hadn't yet noticed I was standing on. I turned away from the park, my feet finding the path back home, each step echoing the uneasy awareness of a new direction, one that might lead me somewhere unexpected. Her voice was a lifeline, pulling me from the depths of my solitude, yet the waves of humiliation still crashed relentlessly around me. When she called, my heart stuttered, caught in a web of nostalgia and dread. After the video went viral, I'd avoided every form of human interaction like the plague, barricading myself in a fortress of silence. The unexpected intrusion was both a balm and a brand. "Hey," she said, her voice familiar, wrapped in memories of late-night escapades and whispered secrets. I could hear the tentative warmth in her tone, the hesitation that whispered she'd seen the video, too. My silence stretched, taut as a bowstring, as I grappled with the urge to hang up or beg for her understanding. "You saw it," I finally managed, my voice cracking like dried leaves underfoot. The humiliation sat heavy in my chest, a leaden ache that seemed to tell its own tale. "Yeah, I did," she admitted, a sigh fluttering down the line. "It's everywhere." Her admission twisted the knife a little deeper, but there was no malice, only a sorrow that mirrored my own. I imagined her sitting at her kitchen table, brow furrowed, her own world momentarily touched by the chaos of my life. "I don't know what to say," I confessed, a bitter chuckle slipping through my defenses. The vulnerability felt like stepping onto thin ice, fragile and unforgiving. I'm just so angry. "And you have every right to be," she whispered, her understanding wrapping around me like a soft, fraying blanket. "But you're not alone in this, okay? I'm still here." Her words should have soothed, yet they only accentuated the jagged chasm between the simplicity of our past and the complexity of now. I couldn't shake the feeling of exposure, like being thrust naked into the public eye, all flaws and failures stark against the sun. I appreciate it, I said, though the gratitude felt hollow, tainted by an undercurrent of resentment that I couldn't quite suppress. I wanted to let it go, to let her support fill the void where hope used to reside. But the anger was a relentless tide, dragging me under whenever I dared to rise. Maybe we can meet up sometime, she suggested, tentative yet hopeful. The offer dangled like a lifeline, yet I hesitated, imagining the whispers, the stares, the weight of invisible scars between us. Maybe, I replied, noncommittal. The word hung between us, a fine thread in the intricate tapestry of our conversation, acknowledging the possibility without promising a future I wasn't sure I was ready to embrace. As we said goodbye, the echo of her voice lingered in my mind, a comforting shadow in the encroaching dark, leaving me both anchored and adrift, yearning for connection, yet shackled by my own unresolved turmoil. The room was soaked in an unbearable silence, broken only by the occasional hum of a passing car, the faint screams of distant sirens, and the rhythmic tick of the old clock on my bedside table. For the 100th time that night, I reached for my phone, the comforting glow the only reprieve from the oppressive darkness. I opened the app, feeling the familiar constriction in my chest as endless comments scrolled into view. Words from strangers, each sentence a trophy of their need to weigh in on my personal misery. I knew I shouldn't be here, that it was all too raw, but it was as if some part of me believed there might be solace hidden in the chaos. Heartbreaking, one commenter wrote, their words both sincere and casually detached. I wondered if they knew what heartbreak truly felt like, how it gnawed at your soul and left a void where your heart used to be. A slight flare of anger made my pulse quicken. What did they know about my life, about my story? Each comment felt like a finger poking into an open wound, but I couldn't look away, desperate to understand why their words hurt more than silence. Scrolling that far down was a form of self-torture, yet stopping felt impossible. I needed to understand. Why did the opinions of strangers matter so much? Why did they hold power over my peace? A particularly long comment caught my eye. Maybe this will make you stronger, it said, as if waking up every day in this newfound emptiness was a training ground for some twisted self-improvement. The anger surged, bright and hot. I tossed the phone onto the bed, yet the words burned within, echoing in the silence that should have brought comfort. I couldn't fathom the inexplicable need these strangers had to offer their 2 cents, their uninvited pearls of wisdom. Who were they to decide what strength looked like, sitting behind screens, typing recklessly with nothing at risk? Nothing in these words could ever reach the parts of me that felt broken beyond repair. There was a comment, buried deep, that simply said, I'm sorry. 2 words, yet they unlocked a floodgate. In those letters, I found a reflection of my own desperation and weakness, a raw sincerity that mirrored the tears often threatening to spill. The vulnerability of admitting helplessness, even in anonymity, hit me harder than anything else. And yet, despite everything, I found myself whispering into the dark, thank you for trying, as if the universe might hear it and offer some semblance of peace. Sleep felt like a distant dream, hovering just beyond reach, taunting me with its absence. I closed my eyes as the screen dimmed, trying to recall the warmth of genuine understanding before the endless commentary poured in. In the quiet, I sought a truth among strangers' voices, their distant echo fading into shadows as exhaustion claimed the space where questions had lingered moments before. I crouched behind the heavy drapery of my mother's old, flower-print curtains, the fabric rough beneath my fingertips. The patterned sunlight filters through like mottled confessions, casting shadows on my face. Through a sliver of glass, I watch her, my sister, bouncing down the paved path, her backpack jostling cheerfully with every step, hair swinging in sync with some silent rhythm only she can hear. Every part of me tenses, a bitter knot tightening in my chest. The world outside seems so achingly vivid, yet I remain enveloped in a numbing fog that clings to the corners of this room. It's impossible not to see her as the embodiment of what I lacked, resilience, or maybe the ignorance to the shattering weight of truth. She moves as if nothing has changed, as if everything is still whole and untouched by the world's unforgiving edge. She walked down the street with the ease of someone unburdened by betrayal. I whisper to myself, my voice barely rising above the teasing rustle of leaves outside. What does she know of the kind of devastation that leaves you hollow, the type that recalibrates the entire axis of your existence? Her normalcy taunts me, a living paradox that walks the same halls and breathes the same air I can barely bring myself to inhale. I draw back, the curtain falling to seal me again in this self-imposed exile. Anger pulses just beneath my skin, laced with envy towards her seeming innocence. How can she just leave, waltzing out into the world as though nothing has pierced her, as though the air isn't thick and stifling with unspoken truths and suppressed screams? But maybe that's the secret. Maybe it's easier to pretend. From this vantage point, hidden and apart, each of her carefree steps lands with the weight of a revelation. Her nonchalance is its own betrayal. It speaks of a resilience or perhaps a naivety that I can't fathom. I press my forehead against the cool glass, wishing I could steal even a fragment of her ease. The door closes behind her with a gentle click, echoing a resigned finality. She's gone, swallowed by the life that marches on outside these walls. A rhythmic tempo I've lost the steps to follow. My mind reels, caught between longing to join her and the paralyzing fear of stepping into a world that feels more like a battlefield than a home. In this silence, the room shifts around me, and I fall into the quiet, letting it drown out the distant, dwindling laughter that drifts back to the house. Maybe tomorrow will be different, I think, but the thought scarcely comforts me as I step away from the window, back into the shadows I've come to know so well. The dining room swam in that heavy silence that comes right before the storm breaks. Our breaths hung in the air like frost, my mother's eyes fixed on the table, Dad's gaze drilling through me. The smell of roast chicken circled like a vulture over a carcass, untouched and forgotten. I could barely hear the clinking of cutlery over the ringing in my ears. "So, you think this is funny?" my dad said, finally breaking the silence. His voice was steady, but what lay beneath it shook me harder than a sudden scream would have. His knuckles, tight around the edge of his knife, turned white against the steel glint. My words fumbled at my lips, trapped by the swelling pressure in my chest. "It's not what it looks like," I managed, each word creaking out like old timber under weight. "Then what is it?" my mother snapped, her voice like a whip in the dense air. She finally looked up, her gaze keen with a mix of desperation and disbelief, and I could see the tears forming, unshed but threatening. I glanced down, focusing on the swirling wood grain of the table, wishing it would pull me in, shelter me from the barrage of their accusations. The video, that stupid video, had been meant as a joke. It was thoughtless, reckless, but not malicious. It was just a thing we did for laughs. It wasn't serious, I said, trying to find ground that didn't shift beneath each step. Laughter? At what cost? Dad's anger simmered just beneath the surface, edging closer to eruption. He took a deep breath, his composure fracturing further with each shallow exhale. The next words tumbled out before I could stop them, a last, desperate attempt to make them understand. It went viral. I didn't think. Mom's voice rose, piercing through the tension like a nail in a board. "Do you ever think? Of us? Of how this affects our family?" Their words were sharp, slicing through any illusion of familial safety, and I found myself drowning in an ocean of blame and shame. Memories of laughter, of Sunday dinners and quiet talks, flickered, now tainted by their disdain. I felt the ground vanish beneath me, and I was falling into a pit of my own making. "I'm sorry," I whispered, barely audible above the echoing clatter of Dad's knife hitting the plate. It was overrun by an avalanche of misunderstandings, a tide pulling us far from the shore of what we'd known as family. His eyes bored into mine, a mix of anger and something else, disappointment. "Sorry won't fix this," he said quietly, and those 4 words hit harder than any shout, sealing the chasm now open between us all. As their arguments continued, I felt like a ghost at that table, haunted by the consequences now woven into the fabric of our family tapestry. I sat on the edge of my bed, the shadows in the room stretching like unsettling fingers across the walls. The air felt dense, like it was pressing in on me, insisting I pay attention to the silence. My mind was a battlefield, scars of past skirmishes and defeats still raw and tender. I found myself wondering, if this narrative, these pieces scattered and haphazardly glued back together, was ever truly mine to begin with. The moonlight slithered through the cracked blinds, catching on the silver frame of a photograph on my nightstand. It was an old picture, the glass smudged by fingerprints from younger days. I leaned forward, picking it up, and ran a thumb over the surface, feeling the texture of time against my skin. Faces looked back at me, familiar yet distant, as if peering across a chasm I didn't realize had grown between us. Their perceptions, their voices had painted the lines of my story for so long, each version a brushstroke of their truths, and I was weary of blending in, of disappearing behind their hues. The narrative felt like an overcast sky, ominous and uncertain, hovering just overhead. Would I find myself entwined in it forever, or could I carve out my own space beneath clearer skies? I lay back, eyes tracing the ceiling's swirling patterns while ideas and doubts tangled together. The room felt smaller, as if it were closing in, testing how much unresolved tension could fit before bursting. Every inch of my being urged me to break the narrative open, to claim the parts that were solely mine before they drifted too far from reach. I held my breath and counted the stars, wondering if I'd ever feel whole enough to embrace the story that was always mine, but never mine alone. The words bubbled up, carrying with them the weight of decisions deferred and the allure of resolutions not yet made. Could courage fill the void left by fear, or were they inseparable, locked in an endless waltz? I sat up again, energy shifting inside me. Somewhere amidst the chaos, a small spark flickered, resolve, slightly tentative but unmistakably there. The silence in the room fractured as my heartbeat picked up, a rhythm both comforting and unknown. It was a rhythm I could own if I dared. The night whispered doubts, growing restless shadows that danced in corners, yet with each breath, I felt the pull of dawn. It was less about fighting the existing story and more about rewriting it, thread by thread, word by word, until it felt like a reflection I could meet without flinching. I put the photograph back on the nightstand, the silver frame catching another sliver of moonlight. I lifted my gaze, a decision taking root somewhere deep and essential. Tomorrow would come, and with it the possibility of being more than just a collection of borrowed stories. The night hummed with change, and for the first time, I listened. With the camera poised, I inhaled deeply, ready to tell the world what only I could say. This was my truth, unedited and undeniably mine. The corner of my bedroom was cramped, filled with scattered papers and dim memories, but it was all I had. My skin tingled with the anticipation of liberation, shadows stretching long with the descending sun outside. I adjusted the camera once more, ensuring it couldn't escape the full, exposed version of me. The walls, with their familiar creases and corners, felt closer than ever, as if they were leaning in to hear my whispered secrets. I sat cross-legged on the floor, the hard surface beneath me grounding in a way that almost felt comforting. Words swirled in my head, a chaotic storm I was determined to calm with each breath. My heartbeat thudded loudly in my chest, an incessant reminder of the life still coursing through me despite everything that had tried to drown it out. The small screen flickered to life, capturing my image staring back, haunted yet hopeful. I pressed record, the red button blinking at me like an impatient heartbeat, syncing us in purpose. My fingers trembled slightly, but I steeled myself, breathing through the tremor, tasting the metallic tang of fear mixed with freedom on my tongue. It was now or never. Hi. I started, voice barely a whisper. I cleared my throat, trying again. Hi. This is for those who think they know my story. Let me tell you what's real. The honesty of my own voice sounded foreign, yet oddly reassuring, echoing into the quiet room. This was the moment I unwrapped the bandages, exposing the scars without flinching away. I've been told by others who I am, what I'm capable of, what I deserve, I said, letting the memories of harsh voices and doubting glances flood through me, momentarily consuming. Each memory ran its current through my veins, electrifying the speech I had carefully scripted yet refused to follow verbatim. The paper with my bullet points lay ignored by my side. Tonight, I spoke from the heart only. My mistakes, they don't define me. Neither do the triumphs I've glossed over to make them look worthier than the falls. The room seemed to agree, its silence confirming my candor. The camera lens, 1,000 unseen eyes, watched attentive and unwavering. I found solace in its silent patience, unwavering in its duty as I laid every piece bare. I paused, feeling the words settle between us. The swell of vulnerability tightened my throat for a moment before easing into something resembling release. I'm still here, I admitted, as much to myself as to the digital witnesses I envisioned on the other side. I am still standing. That's what matters. The words hung in the air, a fragile veil I hoped would cover the years of struggle with a thin coat of understanding. Satisfied, I leaned forward, my face filling the frame with determination. This is my story, I said again, this time more to remind myself. And then I stopped, letting silence take the final breath for me, a trusted companion in this circle of truth.